okay? Let's talk about supplements a little bit. Calcium, to supplement calcium, for tomatoes we use calcium hydroxide or calcium carbonate. So this is something that we talked about in the nutrient water quality session earlier. And we can use these in the water, but also if you have, let's say, you don't have the water conditions to be able to add more calcium. You're maybe don't want to adding in more acid to drop the pH to dissolve more calcium carbonate when you add it in. Well, there are cases like that where it's hard to get the amounts of calcium that you want into the water. Now I can tell you I don't need to foliar spray here at the farm. That's not something I've needed to do, but in some cases that will be what you need to do. So you can foliar spray. They have calcium magnesium sprays. It's called CalMag. They have blossom end rot sprays, but you can specifically spray your plants that need more calcium, a foliar spray, every so often, and it will ward off any of those symptoms. They can absorb it through the leaf tissue. So that's another good way to dose calcium specifically for certain plants and to target those certain plants. But again, in the water, calcium hydroxide, calcium carbonate, we use those to buffer the water anyways, and that's what we would use to bring the calcium level to the desired levels. We've got potassium here. Again, potassium hydroxide, potassium bicarbonate. You could use potassium sulfate if you'd like, but I would favor the first two. Iron. We use powdered or liquid chelated iron, okay? They have a couple different forms of chelated iron depending on what your pH is. Now, most of us, if you follow the directions that I've taught you in this course, you are not going to be above a 7.5 pH in your system. Okay, so for that you can use a cheaper form of chelated iron that works well in the 6.5 and under range, which is really where we're going to be at with the plants. If you're up into a more basic zone, a higher pH zone, then you would favor the other type of chelated iron. And when you look up the different types of iron, when you're going to buy chelated iron, just make sure to look what pH it's effective at and select the correct type. Many times the powdered form is a lot cheaper than the liquid forms of iron, but the liquid forms can work great. They have great dissolvability, and it can be really easy to meter into the system. Okay, and then we get down to magnesium, where some systems may need a boost in magnesium. And for that, you can get it from dolomite, which is a mix of calcium and magnesium. So by using that as your calcium supplement, or in accordance with your calcium supplementing program, you can also dose in a portion of magnesium. Now you would have to look at the dolomite lime bag and see what the proportion of calcium to magnesium is, because it depends where it was mined, and usually these things are mined and locally, or as local as possible, so it's going to change depending on the location that the dolomite's limed from. Dolomite lime is mined from. So we have Epsom salts. Another great way to dose magnesium into the system is Epsom salts. And then we have also magnesium sulfate, which can be dissolved into the system to raise it to desired levels. Okay, great picture here. And you can actually see one tomato on the left with a crack right there at the top. Remember earlier I was talking about how some varieties of tomatoes can crack if you let them sit on the vine too long. Well, right there is a perfect picture to show you. This is what you want. That was left on the vine, cracked, and that will go bad a lot faster than this tomato. So beautiful picture, but learn a little something from it too. So air circulation. This is big with tomatoes, cucumbers, and other vining crops that take up a lot of vertical space in your greenhouse. So high humidity can be a huge problem during intensive culture of tomatoes and other vertical crops. Fans are needed to supply air circulation, and we call this an HAF, and that's a horizontal airflow device. It's a fan, okay? That's the professional name that we call them in a greenhouse. So an HAF device works the best. We can see a 2-degree difference from one end of the greenhouse to the next in a standard 90 by 30 foot greenhouse. Okay, that's what, a 10 by 30 meter greenhouse. With full airflow on at our desired specifications, we can still see a 2-degree difference from one end of the greenhouse to the other. That's how fast the greenhouse can heat up, and that's how much heat it's actually helping to remove from the structure, okay? 50 to 100 feet per minute through the greenhouse is the speed that we want to move this air. We want to keep the air moving 50 to 100 feet per minute to keep humidity down and to keep good air circulation around those plants. And there's a real easy calculation here to come up with the number. You do 2 times the greenhouse square footage per hour, so the floor space. So if we have a 30 feet by 100 foot greenhouse, I just did that so it'd be nice and even number, you have 3,000 square feet. Okay, we multiply that by 2 and we get 6,000 square feet. And then we just convert that to, instead of square feet, to cubic feet per minute. And it's 6,000 CFM worth of air. Real easy. Twice the square footage of the greenhouse, and then change that number to CFM, which is cubic feet of air per minute. Now, that's our total air volume going through the greenhouse. But then we have to divide that up into how many fans we're going to place on the wall of the greenhouse. So in this situation, we're going to divide this into 4 fans. We'll have 2 units, we'll have a central door, and then we'll have 2 other fans, which gives us equal airflow through the whole horizontal base of the greenhouse. And the fans are fairly big. They're usually 3 to 4 feet tall. So we divide this 6,000 CFM by 4 fans, and it tells us we need 1,500 CFM per fan to properly ventilate and exhaust the greenhouse. Well, that's great. Now we just go to a manufacturer greenhouse catalog and pick out some 1,500 CFM fans, which are standard fans in the greenhouse industry. Use a factor of 2.4 for extremely intensive greenhouse culture. Okay, we're using 2.0 here. 2.4 if you're really gonna stack that greenhouse with everything but the tiniest bit of walking space in there for workers. And because tall plants equal wind resistance, and the thicker and more dense it gets, the more power you need to actively move the air through there properly. Temperatures are very important for tomato culture. That's why you see either it done seasonally outside and in fields, or you see intensive production in greenhouses. Well, you can get that intensive production because we have controls of the temperatures. So day temperatures need to be maintained in the 70s and no lower than 60 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Okay, we have a little bit of a window there, but they don't want it extremely hot and they don't want to get too cold at night. High temperatures in excess of 90 degrees Fahrenheit can cause some varieties to stop growing altogether, to abort fruit, and even to die, just to flat out die. They're not made to grow in those high temperatures. Low temperatures can cause tissue decay, slow growth, fruit abortion, and death. So they're not made to withstand low temperatures. All right, if it gets even close to frosting, your plants may live, but they're going to be set back, and you'll never see the production out of them again that they would have if they were maintained in that proper zone. So they can sway outside, but if you want these plants to be magnificent, you follow these rules. Heat costs can become a major factor in greenhouse production, okay, because of these factors. If you're up north and you're going through a cold winter, well, you don't need to just maintain this up in the 40s or 50s. You need it above 60 and preferably in the 70s. That can cost a lot of money to maintain those levels. As far as oxygen, high oxygen levels are preferred for the root system. In deep water culture, root agitation is also beneficial. Not just high oxygen, but you need water movement within that root mass to help nutrient-rich water come in and exchange the nutrient-poor water in that small microenvironment around the root system. So whether we're using oxygen or aeration, we need water movement in there to make sure we get that nutrient-rich water in contact with the proper areas of the root system. In low agitation environments, stratification may occur within the water column, leading to a low oxygen environment in the root zone and slower growth. So if it's pretty stratified, not much mixing, the roots will use up the oxygen in their dense area, and send out more roots to try to find nutrient-rich areas in more oxygen-rich water, and it will stall growth in that main root ball. So you don't want that. You want nutrient-rich, oxygen-rich water constantly being moved in and out of that area. Strong lighting, okay, 18 hours a day is preferable. So they like a lot of light. This is a high light crop. Northern half of the United States typically needs supplemental lighting for 6 months out of the year. So it may be a lot harder to make money on tomatoes in the northern half of the United States, strictly off of your lighting requirements. You need to size out the lighting, see how much it would cost for that supplemental lighting, which any greenhouse company will help you do that. And if you have specific questions, I can help you do that as well. But you size it out and then you look at how much you're paying for electricity and see, okay, this is what it's going to cost me per month to run this. This is what I'm going to make per month off the tomatoes, and then make an educated decision whether it's worth your time and your investment in it in the first place. Okay, a lot of these decisions, if we actually go through it and do the homework, take those couple extra steps, we don't have to take the risk and just hope that we're going to make money. We know whether we're going to make money and have a good chance at it or not, outside of any kind of extreme factors that come into play. So do the math and see if it's worth it. Okay, another picture of some beautiful tomatoes here to slide us into the insect and disease control session. Now, we've already gone through insects and pest management, so we're going to kind of go through this a lot quicker. A lot of this is going to look familiar, but you've already seen this. I just wanted to group this in the tomato section because these are specific to what we can see in a greenhouse where we're raising tomatoes. So we'll just go through this quickly. Beneficial insects, limited options for pesticide use in a recirculating aquaponic culture system. We can use BT for caterpillars, insecticidal soaps if they don't, we keep them out of the water. Organicide is a pesticide that has not been shown to affect fish or their development. And they're expensive, hazardous, and labor intensive to use pesticides. Again, I don't use pesticides. Something I would say about any of these, like organicide, we've shown it doesn't kill fish. But what nobody's done is dose the water with a bunch of organicide, raise the fish to maturity, and then tested the fillets to see if there's any kind of toxins built up in the fillet. Everybody will go off of a pesticide on whether it kills the fish or not. That doesn't tell you anything of whether, I'd rather it kill the fish, because if it doesn't, and it's going to put something harmful in it, and then you're going to eat that, that's much worse than if the fish were to have just gotten killed. So I say don't use pesticides, but if you're going to, do your research. You may be poisoning everybody if you do something like this and just go off of the factor that the fish survived, so it's okay. Biological controls are going to be aphid predatory mites, which we've talked about. The Aphidomyza, which is your midge species that comes in and kills aphids. And then we've got parasitic wasps down here, the Aphidius colemanni and several others. And we've got some mites right here. And we've got a parasitic wasp doing his attack again. Okay. And then we move on to thrips. Again, thrips can be somewhat of a problem in tomatoes, not as big of a problem, but I'd say, especially if you're monoculturing, any of these pests can come in because they're not going to have something that looks better to them to choose to feed on, like a lettuce plant or a bok choy. They're going to go to the one thing in the greenhouse that's growing if you have one crop. Okay, so you can see all of these, and I would look for thrips in the actual tomato flowers, because a lot of these thrips start out in that yellow flower right in the pollen, and you'll see them crawling around in there. We go on to leaf miners, which they will show up, but very, very rare that it would actually cause a detrimental crop loss. But if you see them, very easy to get them moving, to remove them from the greenhouse or dose wasps in to take care of them. We've got the small mealybugs getting fed on by the mealybug destroyer. You got whiteflies. Now this is probably your biggest pest in the greenhouse as far as I'm concerned. whitefly because they can transfer disease so easily. So even if something like spider mite, something comes in that's really bad, it's usually a lot more location specific. This is something where if it gets out of control, they can kill an entire greenhouse because they've just been able to transfer a disease to every single plant. So really keep an eye out for whiteflies and do preventative measures to make sure that they never turn up in high numbers. And again, we see Amblysea swirsky, which swirskis are great for a number of different bad bugs coming into our environment. We've got spider mites here, which will definitely show up in hot, humid climates. That's something that comes with tomatoes, but they can easily be taken care of if we count on that to begin with. Again, identify pests early, treat them immediately and continuously, track the pest numbers with a loop or other sampling method like the sticky paper, reestablish beneficial populations throughout the growing season to keep your crops healthy. That's really important. Don't think just because you have nothing, we don't need to do anything. Maybe this time we can, wait a couple more months. Spend that little bit of money, get your good bugs in there and keep the populations consistent so you don't have outbreaks. It's so much easier to deal with things before they get out of control than when you actually have an outbreak and it can severely harm your business. So we talked about exclusionary methods, using screening, using double doorway entrances with an exhaust fan and foot baths for commercial facilities. So you walk in one door and close it. There's a big fan that's sucking any bugs or anything that got into that small space with you. And so while you're in there, it's exhausting it. You're standing in a foot bath of sanitary solution that kills any kind of pest or disease on your shoes. And then you walk into the main facility. So that's a double door entrance, and that's very standard in many facilities. Smaller screening, like thrip screening, so they have screen that's so small it will eliminate thrips from your greenhouse. But the problem is you get much less airflow going through that screen, and you have to accommodate for that. Especially if you're using natural ventilation, don't get sold on that aspect of, oh, use the tightest screen in the world and nothing will get into the greenhouse. Things will get into your greenhouse. So use the beneficials and these other methods we've described just to eradicate them once they're in. They're going to get in. And the tighter your structure is, the harder it's going to be to get them out without the use of beneficials. Because if it's hard for a bad bug to get in, it's hard for a good bug to get in. And there are many diseases, we'll move over to that, which can affect tomato plants. Fusarium wilt is huge. We got powdery mildew, gray leaf spot, late blight, early blight. There is a lot of disease out there, okay? Use the internet to diagnose and treat the problem. That's the easiest way. You're going to be guessing all day because there's so many diseases out there if you're just asking people, what does this look like or what does that look like? Get on, this is a great place, vegetableonlinepath.cornell.edu. So this will, or Vegetable MD online path. But this is Cornell's website that helps you diagnose diseases with tomato problems. You can also call a state extension agent in the US here, and they can help you diagnose tomato problems, especially if you're in the state. Okay, you call your state extension agent, he's gonna know, he's gonna be familiar with the common diseases that show up where you're growing your crop. So make use of those resources there. Grafting, okay? So we're out of the beneficial insect area, the disease area, and we're gonna move into grafting and rootstock selection, okay? A little bit more of the advanced horticultural techniques that you can use to improve your tomato crop. And in this tomato, we can see a number of small tomato starts that have already been cleft grafted and are in the healing process. So is grafting right for me? Well, it has to do with whether you're doing small scale versus commercial production. As labor increases versus the yield increase, okay? So your labor is going to increase initially to make these grafts, but it's not that hard. And what's going to be a consequence is we're actually going to have a yield increase from that. all right? There is space considerations for plants to heal, and there is some expertise involved. You're not gonna get 100% heal rate when you do this for your first time. So you need to practice a little like anything else and develop the technique to do this. Okay, is it right for me? Yes, it is. Okay, it's right for everybody, even a home producer, because just a few more weeks and a little bit more work and you can massively affect the production of that tomato plant. So we get enhanced nutrient and water uptake, we get improved plant growth, increased yields, higher tolerances to environmental stresses, better fruit quality and shelf life, easier uptake of nutrients in an aquaponics system. Okay, that's not written on here. You get that depending on the rootstock you use. You can graft a rootstock that is really good at growing in poor soil conditions, and it helps that plant extract what it needs easier and grow easier in the exact same conditions that it would be growing in with its normal rootstock. That's huge. So here's some common rootstock that we're going to use to graft. And again, the rootstock is the root portion, okay? Above the root portion, the plant that we're actually using and getting fruit from, we call that the scion, all right? That's the donor plant that we're going to graft on to the roots that we want to use in the system. So these are all used for rootstock. If you grow most of these plants, they will grow inedible tomatoes that don't taste good, that's nothing you would want to eat, but they're not selected for their fruit production. They're selected for their root production, okay? If you get that through your mind, this starts to make sense. We can take the best of both worlds. We can take inedible, wild-type tomato plants that grow great in a lot of conditions, but don't produce anything we want to eat, and we can graft a good edible tomato onto that to get awesome fruit in these really poor conditions. That's the whole idea behind grafting, is we take the best of both worlds of these two types of plants and we can combine them together. No genetic modification, no laboratory nonsense. We simply cut them, put them together, and let them heal. Okay, so here's the rootstock selection. We've got Colossus, Multifort, Maxifort, Survivor, Estamino, DRO 138TX, and there are many, many, many more, especially depending on where you're at in the world. Suppliers for rootstock you can get from Johnny Seeds, Paramount Seeds, High Mowing Seeds, De Ruyter Seeds, and DP Seeds, just to name a few. You can also get on Google and type in tomato rootstock, buy tomato rootstock. You'll get other people that come up. So I've used everybody but DP Seeds here and have had great luck. So, but I've heard good things about DP Seeds as well. You want to sprout the rootstock and the scion, the upper portion of the desirable tomato plant, okay? We want to theoretically sprout them at the same time. So when we make our cut and attachment, they're the same height and same age. Unfortunately, not all tomato plants grow at the same speed. So if you're doing this on a large scale, I would initially just sprout a few of each type of tomato seeds and measure their growth rates over a few weeks. As long as they're very similar, they will make a good match for grafting. If one outgrows the other, then you need to distance the seeding appropriately so they're the same size when you actually make the graft. We want to graft when the plant has reached its second set of true leaves or above. So first set of leaves is the cotyledons. Then you have your first set of true leaves, second set of true leaves. That's what we're talking about, okay? And we're going to use a splice graft. That's what I prefer to use for grafting tomato plants. And we're going to have to allow 2 weeks in a healing chamber after we make this graft. And a healing chamber is very similar conditions to something when you're trying to germinate a seed. We do not want it to dry out. We don't want too much sun getting in there, and we don't want too much humidity buildup. Well, the big thing with grafts, we don't want any sun, okay? We don't want them to focus on vegetative growth. We want them to focus on healing that wound. And if you put them in the sun, one, they're going to wilt fast and they'll probably die. They won't heal. And two, it's going to send energy to the leaves, which is not what we want. We want it to halt growth altogether, heal that wound, and then we're going to slowly adjust it into brighter light and allow it to grow out the rest of its life. Okay, slowly acclimate to full sun over a week and place into its final grow out spot. This is an in-depth guide to grafting, okay? It gives you step-by-step for this entire process, and it's very useful if you intend to graft. So do yourself a favor, click on the link and read through that, and it will give you a lot more specifics on the grafting process and probably a lot more color pictures for you to see as well. Now you can see the graft is made right here. Here's a tomato plant. We've removed the leaves so we don't have extra vegetative growth that the plant needs to focus on. We just have the top shoot, okay? And right here you see a diagonal cut. A diagonal cut is made because it gives you more tissue surface area to heal than a perfectly flat cut. So we make a diagonal cut, and then this is called a silicone grafting clip. They're very cheap. It's a small piece of silicone, and that's placed around both the scion and the rootstock to hold the joint together and keep the plant upright. And they work really well as long as you do the plants at the right size. If you wait until these are a week older, they're not going to want to fit in those silicone clips very good. Okay, they sell other clips that you can buy for larger plants, but this is the way to do it. You don't want to graft foot-tall plants. You want to graft plants that are small, and you can do a couple hundred of them, and then if anything dies, or let's say you get 80% of them that live, well, that's fine because you still can reach your desired number in a real small area. If you're grafting plants that are a foot tall, it takes a much larger area in healing chamber, etc., to get it done. But you can see small diagonal cut, silicone clip, and that's in the process of healing right now. Okay, that's the process of grafting. That's not very hard. The hard part is to actually become familiar enough with the technology that you get a high percentage of those grafts that heal. Because starting out, you're probably going to get a lot of them that die. You're not used to cutting. You want to use a nice, brand new, clean, thin razor. You want a strong, thin cut through there. You don't want any kind of abrasion. So, keep these things in mind, and again, practice. Once you practice, you'll hone those skills and you'll become very good at grafting. Okay, we'll go over to greenhouse pollination now, and we see a nice bumblebee right here doing what we need him to do. Looking at tomato flower, okay, there's two main parts we really need to pay attention to. We've got the anthers right here, okay, and the anthers are where the pollen is produced. It's on the inside of these, all right? There's a lot of pollen there. The stigma, the sticky end right here of the style, that catches the pollen. So the pollen's inside here, and right here is where it needs to touch to actually pollinate the flower. That shows you don't need to do much, okay? It doesn't need to move from this flower to this flower to that flower. We basically just need to move this small fraction, of a millimeter from the inside of the flower to the stigma, and boom, you've got a tomato that's going to set fruit. And a bumblebee is going to come in here and be moving around. Just the moving around is going to tap pollen out. It's going to stick to there. He's going to work his way up in there. Pollen's going to fall out. It's going to stick to there. It's going to be covering his body. Pollen will stick to there, okay? So that's how tomatoes are pollinated. Now, if you pollinate this with an electric toothbrush type of vibrating tool, when you touch the truss, this entire, flower shakes. Well, the pollen falls out of there and sticks to the stigma. And that's how pollination is occurring without the insects. So hopefully that close-up of the tomato flower kind of drives the point home, is we don't need much to pollinate these flowers. So we can do hand pollination, as I just mentioned here, commercially available vibrating tool. Use an electric toothbrush and cut the bristles off. There's a lot of ways to do it, but you basically just touch the truss of tomato flowers and it vibrates that, and it allows the pollen to pollinate. You do this every 2 days. You must vibrate the base of all flower clusters to ensure pollination. Can you imagine that? If you have 400 tomato plants and every 2 days you have to hit every flower cluster with a vibrating tool, that's a lot of labor. Sunny midday to early afternoon is ideal, and what you want to think is dry pollen. You don't want wet, humid pollen or in a damp time of the day, because it's not going to stick and it's not going to fertilize like you want it to. A lot of times in really hot, humid conditions, you get flowers that will set, but they won't set fruit. And that's because it's too humid for that pollen to actually fertilize the flowers. So it's very labor intensive on a large scale, as I had just mentioned. We move over to using bumblebees for pollination. And one hive can do the work of 2 people working 40 hours a week, and they can do it better. All right? We're not meant to be tomato pollinators. That's not what humans have evolved to be. Bees, on the other hand, are extremely efficient pollinators. And one hive, again, think what it's going to cost you to hire 2 people working 40 hours a week to pollinate your garden, and think what it's going to cost you for a hive of bees. Pick bees every time. 1 hive per ½ acre of tomatoes, and you can actually buy smaller hives of other types of bumblebees that are available for smaller greenhouses, where you may only get 20 to 30 bumblebees in a small hive. These hives last 2 to 3 months in span, and they can range from $50 to $200 in price range. That's a lot less than a 40-hour-a-week full-time worker, okay, every time. So definitely keep natural pollinators in mind for your greenhouse. You can also use wind pollination. You have those fans cooking, you're going to get a lot of pollination just from the wind movement, the air movement around this plant. You get some natural pollination that way, but you'll get lower fruit set in densely planted greenhouses, definitely, okay? When it's dense, you need pollinators in there hitting every flower. It's fine for small plantings where every fruit setting maybe doesn't matter, where it's not the end of the world if you're not hitting the exact commercial production values that you had aimed for at the beginning of the season. But it's not ideal for large grow outs. For large grow outs, you need pollinators in there. And the conclusion, okay, we've reached the end here. The conclusion for this tomato talk. With proper system design and husbandry, growing tomatoes can be easy, fun, and profitable addition to your aquaponic operation. Okay, you can really make good money off these tomatoes. I believe it was last year we grew 10,000 pounds of tomatoes here on the farm. Okay, that's a large amount for me, most I've grown in a year. And we sell our tomatoes for around $8 a pound. But when you look at the end of the year through discounts, through things I've used, etc., we can expect maybe I got $6 a pound for that. That was still $60,000 that I made off of tomatoes last year, okay? That's a real world number, a number that means something. Again, it's risky. If I had disease set in, that would have been months of work for nothing, where I could have been making money growing other crops. But to lay some real world numbers, if you're selling $1 a pound, you're not making that much money, okay? $1 a pound, what, $8,000, $10,000? That's not a lot of money off of all the work you put into that crop, okay? When you're selling, again, I'm in Orlando, I've got a healthy market, I'm able to get the number that I need out of that crop. And we've done that through marketing, we've done that through a lot of different avenues to obtain the real market value that I know these tomatoes are worth. And we've been able to make a lot more money by doing that. Okay, so just to tie this all together, we've got the designs, we've got the varieties, we know the possibilities, we know the risks, we know, everything out there, but you have to decide, you have to go out there and research, make the customer connections, and see if on paper all these numbers are going to make it worth your while. Because I can tell you, growing tomatoes is a lot more labor intensive than it is to grow, say, lettuce. Tomatoes, every 2 days, you're out there trimming tomatoes and leaning and lowering those plants. Every 2 to 3 days, okay? Every plant in the greenhouse. That's a substantial amount of labor over lettuce that you plant and you stare at for 40 to 45 days until you pick it out and harvest it again. Keep all these things in mind and be comfortable with this before you go into it. And by all means, if you're starting out, I always say, like I did my first year, start small. Do a small area of tomatoes. It helps you penetrate the market. It's always better to have less product than the market actually wants, so that drives future sales. It tells people, hey, this is limited quantity, limited production, get it while you can. And you can really make a name for yourself in growing this premium product. The next year, you scale up. all those customers remember your product, and it's that much easier to, one, maintain that premium price that you had while it was in low quantities and it was a specialized, low, hard to get product. And then two, now you're producing a lot more. You've maintained that high price set, you've got a reputation for it, and you're able to distribute a lot more fruit without starting back at square one. So if you're starting out, by all means, don't go all the way to tomatoes or something like that unless you can really market it and the business plan pans out. So I'll shut up now. We'll move on. One last beautiful picture of tomatoes. Some Chadwick cherries here. I graft these. They're known as the Chatterson cherry around these parts. That's what everybody comes up and asks for, and they love these fruit, okay? I love these fruit. Any questions, guys? Shoot me an email. We'll go over it during the weekly question and answer session. And I really hope you got a lot out of this talk and can confidently go home and achieve these results. Thank you.